I was 35 when I buried my husband in a country that didn't speak my language. The air that day was heavy, thick with the kind of silence that makes every sound feel wrong. The priest read from a small black book I couldn't understand, and I just stood there, hands trembling, heart numb, pretending I could still feel his pulse in the wind. His name was Ethan. We'd been married for 7 years. Together for 10. We met in Singapore when I was 25. Working as a nurse in an overstretched hospital ward. He was an architect with soft eyes and a voice that sounded like calm in a storm. He'd come in one night after falling off a scaffolding. I was the one who stitched him up. He said I saved him. But the truth is, he saved me. When he died, it wasn't the death that broke me. It was the aftermath. Death is loud at first. People call, cry, bring food, say things like he's in a better place. But then the noise fades. The casseroles stop coming. And what's left is the quiet, the kind that hums under your skin until you start wondering if you'll ever hear your own heartbeat again. I came home to Vietnam for the funeral, thinking at least my family would be there. But I should have known better. My mother had always been polite with Ethan, but never warm. You married too far away. She used to say, distance makes love thin. She didn't come to the wedding because it was too expensive. My father sent a 2-line email that said, congratulations. Take care of each other. So when I arrived at my parents' house after the funeral, still in black, still half broken, my mother greeted me with a sigh. You should rest, she said. You look terrible. No hug. No warmth. Just that. I looked around and realized how little had changed. Zama beige curtains. Same smell of incense and furniture polish. Same family photo on the wall, me at 16. My brother Lucas, at 20. My parents looking proud of him and vaguely disappointed in me. Lucas was their golden child. He always had been. Tall, charming, successful, with a family of his own and a smile that made people trust him. When he came over that evening, he hugged me tight. I'm sorry. Mel, he whispered. I can't imagine what you're going through. But when I looked up at him, I could see at the flicker of pity that wasn't about my grief. It was about how inconvenient it was. He glanced at my suitcase in the corner. How long are you staying? I don't know yet, I said. Just until I can think straight. He smiled politely. Of course. Just don't lose yourself here. Okay. You have to get back to your life. My life. The one that had been buried under a white tombstone a week ago. The first week passed in fragments. My mother busied herself with chores, never looking directly at me. My father spent most of his time reading the newspaper in silence. Lucas visited once, then texted me that he was too busy with work. I spent hours sitting by the window, watching the rain. Grief makes everything smaller. Meals, conversations, hope. It was as if my world had been reduced to a single color gray. Then one afternoon, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but I caught enough to make my stomach twist. She can't stay here forever, my mother said. She just lost her husband. My father replied quietly. It's been 2 months. She's bringing the mood of the house down. And Lucas's wife doesn't want her around the children. She says it's too depressing. I remember standing there, frozen, listening to the sound of my own heart breaking for the second time. I wasn't even a person to them anymore. I was a burden. That night, I packed my things. Not because they told me to leave, but because staying would have killed what was left of me. I rented a small room above a bakery in the city. It was cheap, cramped, and smelled like sugar and burnt dough. But it was mine. For a while, I tried to rebuild. I got a job at a small clinic, working long shifts to fill the hours. Patients came and went. Some smiled. Some didn't. I didn't mind. It was easier to care for other people's pain than to face my own. But grief doesn't stay quiet forever. It hides. Waits. then finds new ways to remind you it's still there. One night, he collapsed. I'd been dizzy for days, brushing it off as exhaustion. But when I hit the floor, my phone slipped from my hand. I remember crawling toward it, the sound of my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I called my mother. No answer. I called Lucas. Straight to voicemail. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the smell of sugar drifting through the air from the bakery below. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My head throbbed, and there was a nurse checking my IV line. "You're lucky," she said. "Sévère dehydration. Exhaustion. Mild anemia. You need rest, not work." I asked how I got there. She smiled softly. "A stranger found you. The baker downstairs. He said you fainted at his door." Her words sank slowly. A stranger had saved me when my own family wouldn't even answer the phone. When I was discharged 3 days later, I returned to my apartment. The baker, a quiet man named Min, had left a note outside my door. "I made soup. It's still warm. Please eat. The world is kinder when you let it be." I don't know why, but that note broke me more than anything my family had done. Because kindness from a stranger feels heavier when you realize it's filling a space love was supposed to live in. I sat on the floor and ate that soup straight from the pot, tears streaming down my face. Not from sadness this time, but from relief. Relief that maybe the universe hadn't forgotten me completely. I spent the next few weeks recovering. Min would leave little things by my door. Fresh bread. Fruit. Once even a bunch of wildflowers in a chipped vase. He never expected anything in return. Sometimes we'd talk for a few minutes when I went downstairs. He had an easy smile. The kind that didn't need words. I didn't realize it then. But he was teaching me something my family never did, that love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes, it's quiet, patient, simple, still. I couldn't stop thinking about the phone calls, about the silence on the other end, about how nobody came. A part of me still wanted to believe there was a reason, an emergency, a misunderstanding, something that would make it make sense. But one morning, I got my answer. A neighbor sent me a link. It was a video from a local news segment, an interview with my brother, Lucas. He was smiling, standing in front of a new office building. The headline read, "Local entrepreneur expands charity program to support widows and families in need." I watched as he said, "My family has always believed in helping those who have no one else." Those words hit me like a slap. The man who ignored my calls as I lay on the floor was now being celebrated for helping people like me. And that was the moment I stopped being sad. That was the moment I got angry. Because grief can crush you. But betrayal teaches you how to fight. And I was done being silent. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the glow of my phone lighting the room. The video of Lucas kept replaying in my mind, his smile, his calm, practiced tone, the way he used the word family like it was something he'd invented. By morning, the video had gone viral. Comments poured in. "What a good man, he's proof there's still kindness in the world. We need more people like him." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell every single person in that comment section the truth, that the man they were praising was the same brother who'd ignored my calls as I begged for help from a hospital floor. But instead, I sat there in silence, coffee growing cold in my hands. Because part of me was still that same girl who wanted her family's approval. Part of me still wanted to believe that maybe, somehow, this was all a misunderstanding. That illusion lasted exactly one day. The next morning, a journalist came to my clinic. Her name was Leanne. She was young, bright-eyed, holding a notebook and a recorder. "You're Amelia Hayes, right?" she asked. "Lucas Tran's sister." I froze. "Yes. Why?" She smiled politely. "I'm doing a feature on his foundation, The Hands That Build. I'd love a few words about your family's values. Your upbringing. Maybe what inspired your brother's philanthropy." My throat tightened. I could have lied. I could have said something neutral and polite. Something that would keep the peace. But something inside me snapped, not loud. Not dramatic. Just final. I think you should hear a different story. I said quietly. Mine. We met at a small cafe near the river that afternoon. It was one of those cloudy days that makes everything look softer. Like the world is holding its breath. I told her everything from Ethan's death. To my parents' indifference. To Lucas's silence. To the night I collapsed. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. She just listened. Her pen moving steadily across the page. When I finished, she sat back, eyes wide, and said softly, "Would you be willing to go on record?" My first instinct was fear. My mother's voice echoed in my head. Family matters. Stay in the family. But then I thought about the soup Min had left by my door. About the way strangers had shown me more love than my own blood. And suddenly, the truth didn't feel like betrayal anymore. It felt like freedom. "Yes," I said. "You can use my name." The article came out 2 weeks later. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't cruel. It was honest. The headline read, "When Charity Begins Elsewhere, the Forgotten Sister of a Local Hero." It told my story exactly as I'd lived it, not as a sob story, but as a quiet rebellion. It didn't paint Lucas as a villain. It didn't need to. It just told the truth. By noon, the story was everywhere. My phone buzzed nonstop messages. Calls. Emails. Some from old classmates who said they'd always suspected something about Lucas's perfect life. Some from strangers who thanked me for being brave. And then, finally, one message from my mother. "Mom, what have you done? You've ruined your brother's reputation." His devastated. I stared at the message. Fingers shaking. Me. He ruined it himself. I just told the truth. No reply. By evening, Lucas showed up at my apartment. He looked furious, his tie loosened. Eyes dark. Jaw tight. I didn't invite him in. But he pushed past me anyway. "How could you?" he hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I stood there. Arms crossed. I told my story. "You embarrassed this family," he said. "Do you think the world needed to know our private business? Do you know how much damage you've caused?" "Private business," I repeated. My voice shaking. "You mean the part where you left your sister to die alone while pretending to be a saint on television? That part." He flinched. "You're twisting things." "No," I said. "I'm untwisting them." For a second, we just stared at each other, two strangers bound by blood but nothing else. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You always wanted attention. Well, congratulations. You finally got it." He turned to leave. "Lucas," I said. He stopped at the door. "Do you even feel guilty?" He didn't turn around. "Guilt doesn't pay bills," he said, and walked out. I didn't cry. Not this time. I just stood there, feeling something new. Rise in me, not rage. Not sadness. But power. Because the thing about telling the truth is, once it's out there, nobody can take it back. 2 days later, the foundation suspended operations, pending internal review. Sponsors backed out. Journalists dug deeper. And the facade Lucas had built the perfect family, the flawless reputation, the charity built on virtue began to crumble. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just watched quietly. Because revenge, when it's real, doesn't need noise. It breathes in silence. My parents didn't call. Not once. But a week later, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at my door. No sender's name. Just my address written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I saw the article. I didn't know how badly we failed you. I thought distance was strength. That silence was dignity. But I see now it was cowardice. I don't expect forgiveness. Just know you were right. It wasn't signed, but I knew it was my father. I read it 3 times, then folded it gently and placed it inside Ethan's old journal. Not because it fixed anything, but because it mattered. It was the first apology I'd ever received from my family. Min found me sitting outside that night, staring at the sky. He handed me a warm cup of coffee. "You look lighter," he said. Maybe because I finally stopped carrying everyone else's guilt. He smiled. "That's heavy luggage." "It is," I said, "and I think I'm done packing it." We sat there in silence for a while, the city lights reflected in the river, flickering like tiny fires. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. "I don't know what's next," I said softly. "You don't have to," he replied. "You just have to move forward." And somehow, that felt like the truest thing anyone had ever said to me. The next morning, I deleted my family's group chat. I didn't block them. I didn't make an announcement. I just left quietly, because sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's self-respect. For years, I thought revenge meant destruction, but standing there in that tiny kitchen, coffee in hand, sunlight spilling across the counter, I realized the truth. Real revenge is peace. After Lucas's scandal broke, the world around me went quiet again. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy or suffocating anymore. It was clean, like the calm after a long, terrible storm. I stopped checking social media, stopped reading the comments. People had opinions. Of course they always do. Some called me brave. Others called me bitter. But for once, I didn't care what they called me. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't living in reaction to anyone else's expectations. My only rule now was honesty. With myself, with others, with life. The following week, I went back to work at the clinic. I thought it would be awkward. But something surprising happened. My coworkers, the same people who used to avoid talking about my sad story, now looked at me differently. Not with pity, but with respect. One of the younger nurses, Mai, came up to me during lunch. "I read your article," she said softly. "My mother went through something similar. Her family disowned her after my father died. She never talked about it. But when I showed her your story," she cried. She said, "Finally." Someone said it out loud. A blank. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and smiled, feeling something loosen inside my chest. A knot I hadn't realized was still there. That's the strange thing about pain. When you share it, it stops being yours alone. It becomes a bridge, connecting you to others who survived their own versions of hell. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, I closed the clinic and started walking home. Min was standing outside the bakery, wiping flour from his hands. He smiled when he saw me. "Rough day?" he asked. "Not rough," I said. "Just full." He chuckled. "That's progress." We sat on the bench outside, sharing warm bread straight from the oven. The smell of butter and cinnamon filled the air. For a moment, it almost felt like peace. "You ever think about starting over somewhere else?" he asked. "All the time," I said, "but I'm not sure where I'd go." He nodded thoughtfully. "You don't always need a new place. Sometimes you just need new people." I looked at him then, really looked. There was something steady in his eyes. Not pity, not curiosity, just quiet understanding. The kind that only comes from someone who's been through their own kind of pain. A few days later, I got a call from a producer at a local talk show. They wanted to feature me on a special episode about women who chose truth. My first instinct was to say no. I wasn't a celebrity. I wasn't an activist. I was just a woman who told her story. But something about the producer's voice, gentle, sincere, made me pause. "It's not about drama," she said. "It's about healing. We think your story could help others." That night, I lay awake thinking about it. I imagined my mother watching, my father sitting quietly, Maybe proud. Maybe regretful. Lucas changing the channel. And then I thought of all the women like Mai's mother, the ones who never got to speak. So I said yes. The day of the interview, I wore a simple blue dress and no jewelry. I wanted to look like myself. Not a headline. The studio lights were harsh. But the host, a kind, middle-aged woman named Thao, made me feel at ease. She asked about Ethan first. About the marriage. About love. I spoke softly. Carefully. The way you handle glass that still has sharp edges. Then she asked, "Do you forgive your family?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Some days. I think I have. Other days, I feel the old ache come back. But maybe forgiveness isn't the point. Maybe it's just learning not to bleed every time you remember." Tao nodded, eyes shining. That's powerful. When the interview aired, messages flooded in. Women, men, even a few older viewers who said it reminded them of someone they once loved and failed to protect. And somewhere among all the noise, one message stood out. From Mom, I watched. "You spoke beautifully. I didn't deserve that kind of grace." I didn't reply, but I saved the message. Not because I needed to forgive her, but because sometimes silence isn't punishment, it's acknowledgement. A few months passed. The clinic got busier. The bakery downstairs expanded. Min started a weekend project teaching local kids how to bake. Every Saturday, the alley filled with laughter and the smell of sugar. I helped, sometimes wiping counters, bandaging little fingers, teaching them how to measure ingredients. It wasn't glamorous, but it was healing. One afternoon, Min handed me a cupcake covered in pink frosting. "For you," he said. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion. You just look like you could use sweetness." I laughed. "You're dangerous. You know that. You keep doing this. I'll never want to leave." He smiled, eyes crinkling. "Good. Then stay." It wasn't romantic. Not yet. It was something gentler, a companionship born out of shared solitude. But there was safety in it, and I hadn't felt safe in a long time. In late spring, I got another letter. This one was from Lucas. It was short, written in his usual tidy handwriting. "The foundation's gone. I've lost everything. Maybe I deserved it. Maybe you think this makes us even. But I want you to know I never hated you. I just didn't know how to love you the way you needed. I'm sorry." I stared at that letter for a long time. Part of me wanted to rip it apart. Another part wanted to write back. But in the end, I just folded it neatly and placed it next to my father's apology. Because forgiveness isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's just the decision to stop collecting pain like souvenirs. That summer, I visited Ethan's grave for the first time since everything happened. The cemetery was quiet. Sunlight flickering through the trees. I brought sunflowers, the ones he used to buy me when we couldn't afford anything else. I knelt down and said softly, "You'd probably laugh at all this. Wouldn't you? Me? On TV. Me. Making peace with chaos." A breeze brushed my hair. Light and warm. Like an answer I didn't need to hear to understand. "I'm okay now," I whispered. "Really?" I stayed there until the light began to fade. Then stood up and walked away, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. Because grief had stopped being my prison. It had become my teacher. I didn't realize how much my life had changed until one morning I woke up and didn't feel afraid of the day ahead. For years, I'd been moving through my days like a shadow, careful. Quiet. Invisible. But that morning, something was different. The air felt lighter. The silence didn't weigh on me anymore. I brewed coffee, opened the window, and watched the city stir awake. People hurrying to work. Vendors setting up their stalls. Children chasing each other with backpacks too big for their shoulders. For the first time in years, I didn't feel separate from them. I felt like part of the living again. I was alive. It sounds simple. But when you've spent years surviving instead of living, that realization feels like resurrection. Min noticed it too. He came up to my apartment that morning with a box of pastries and that familiar, gentle smile. "You're glowing," he said. "Must be the sugar in the air." "Yoked." He laughed. "No. It's peace. It looks good on you." We sat together at my small kitchen table, sunlight spilling across our plates. He talked about expanding the bakery, about hiring a few of the local teens who needed work. I listened, smiling at the way his hands moved when he talked, animated and alive. When he finished, I said quietly, "You know, I used to think love meant someone rescuing you from pain. But maybe it just means someone standing beside you while you learn to rescue yourself." He looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "I think that's the only kind that lasts." By summer, my world had begun to rebuild itself quietly, gently, without permission from the past. I started teaching part-time at the clinic, helping new nurses learn patient empathy and communication. It wasn't glamorous work, but it filled me in a way nothing else had. Every day, I saw people carrying invisible grief. The woman who smiled too much, the man who flinched when you said his name, the teenager who laughed too loud. They were all trying to prove to the world that they were okay. And maybe, in helping them, I was proving it to myself too. Sometimes, after work, I'd walk along the river where Ethan used to take me when we first met. The city lights reflected on the water like scattered stars. I'd whisper little things to him, things I never got to say. How I was learning to cook. How the apartment smelled like bread now. How I finally understood what he meant when he said, "Home isn't a place. It's a feeling." Then, one evening, as I was locking up the clinic, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. "Mom, your father is in the hospital." For a moment, the world went still. My first instinct was disbelief. Then guilt. Then that old, familiar ache of obligation. I hesitated before replying, but in the end, I typed back which hospital. When I arrived, the lights were dim, and the air smelled of antiseptic and wilted flowers. My mother sat in the corridor, hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller than I remembered. "He had a mild heart attack," she said without looking at me. "They say he'll recover." I nodded and quietly took the seat beside her. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was just space we didn't know how to fill. Finally, she said, "I watched your interview again." I turned to her, unsure what to say. "You spoke well," she continued. "You didn't make us look cruel. But we were. I know that now." Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time, I saw her not as my mother, but as a woman flawed, frightened, shaped by her own unspoken wounds. "I didn't know how to love you without control," she whispered. "And when Ethan died, I didn't know how to hold your pain. So, I pretended it wasn't there." I reached for her hand. It was cold, trembling. "Mom," I said softly. "I'm done carrying the blame for everyone's silence. But I don't hate you. I just can't go back." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't want you to. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry." For the first time, I believed her. When I stepped into my father's room, he was asleep. His face looked peaceful, almost childlike. The machines beeped softly. Steady. Alive. I stood there for a long time, watching him breathe. And then I realized something I hadn't before. He had always loved me quietly. Not the way I wanted, but in his own restrained, distant way. He was a man raised to believe that love was stoicism, that softness was weakness, and maybe that's why he couldn't save me when I needed him most. I touched his hand gently and whispered, "You can rest now." Dad, I've got myself. He stirred slightly, his fingers twitching, as if trying to hold on to something. I smiled through tears. Sometimes closure doesn't come with grand gestures or perfect words. Sometimes it's just a quiet acceptance that the past will never apologize the way you wanted. But you can still move forward. When I left the hospital that night, I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt clean, like a wound that had finally scabbed over. I walked home through the sleeping city, streetlights flickering like tiny prayers. When I turned the corner to my building, I saw Min waiting outside with 2 cups of tea. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, for once. I think I really am." He handed me the cup, his fingers brushing mine. "Then that's worth celebrating." We sat there on the front steps, sipping tea under the quiet hum of the streetlights. No words. No need. Just 2 people who had found each other on the other side of pain. And as the night deepened, I realized something else. Forgiveness doesn't always end with reunion. Sometimes, it ends with release. Weeks turned into months. My father recovered. My mother started visiting occasionally, always bringing small things: homemade soup, a book, once even a photo of Ethan and me that she'd kept all these years. We never talked about the past again, but there was a gentleness in her now that hadn't been there before. As for Lucas, I never heard from him again. I saw his name once, buried deep in a small headline, something about bankruptcy, relocation. I didn't click, because some stories don't need sequels. The day autumn returned, Min and I took a train out of the city. We didn't have a destination, just wanted to see where the tracks would take us. The air was crisp, the sky pale blue, the fields golden and endless. At one stop, we got off and walked to a nearby lake. The surface was glassy, reflecting the sky perfectly. Min skipped a stone across the water, and it rippled like time itself. I stood there, breathing deeply, feeling something inside me settle like all the pieces of my life had finally stopped floating. "Do you ever wonder what comes after healing?" I asked. He smiled. "Maybe just living." And for the first time, those words didn't scare me. They felt like a promise. It's strange how life rebuilds itself in the quietest ways, not through grand victories or sudden miracles, but through the steady hum of ordinary days that finally feel safe again. Some mornings now, I wake before the alarm. The light comes in soft through the thin white curtains. I make coffee, hear the hum of the bakery downstairs, and smile when the smell of fresh bread drifts up through my window. That scent used to make me ache. Now it makes me grateful. Sometimes Min knocks softly on my door, holding a paper bag with warm croissants. "For quality control," he says with that crooked grin. I tease him about using me as a test subject. But the truth is, his presence has become the heartbeat of my mornings. We never labeled what we were. We didn't need to. It wasn't romance in the way movies show it. It was companionship built from understanding, from survival. A kind of love that doesn't demand or consume, just exists quietly between shared silences. I think Ethan would have liked him. I think he would have smiled at how life found a way to be kind to me again. One evening, I was closing up the clinic when a young woman came rushing in, tears streaking down her face. She couldn't have been more than 22. She'd just lost her mother, the only family she had. "I don't know what to do," she sobbed. "Everyone says to be strong, but I don't know how." I held her hands, looked into her trembling eyes, and said softly, "Then you don't have to be strong right now. You just have to breathe. Strength will come later." Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steadied. And in that moment, I saw a reflection of who I once was standing in front of a grave, terrified, alone, pretending to be strong because everyone told me I had to be. I wanted to tell her what I wish someone had told me, that grief isn't a sign of weakness, that forgiveness isn't surrender, that healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering without breaking. But I didn't say all that. I just stayed there with her, letting the silence do the work. Because sometimes, silence speaks more gently than words ever could. A few weeks later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a little boy holding a cupcake, grinning from ear to ear. On the back, written in careful handwriting, "Lucas is starting school. He's happy. I'm trying too." It was signed Cassandra. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the photo. My first instinct was disbelief. How had she even found my address? But then I looked at the boy's smile, and something inside me softened. Because life, in its strange way, always circles back to grace. I put the photo in a small frame and placed it beside Ethan's picture. Not because I wanted to keep the past alive, but because every person who once hurt me had also taught me something. Cassandra taught me how to stand up for myself. Lucas taught me how to speak my truth. My parents taught me the weight of silence. And Ethan taught me how to love again. Even after the world fell apart, autumn melted into winter. And one evening, Min and I walked by the river. The air was cold enough to sting our cheeks. But the water was calm, dark, and still. The lights from the bridge shimmered across its surface like 1,000 tiny promises. I told him about the photo, about how strange it felt to finally receive peace from the same people who had once given me pain. I listened quietly, then said, "Maybe that's what forgiveness really is. Not saying it's okay, but saying it no longer owns me." I smiled. "Yeah, I think that's exactly it." We stopped by the railing, our breath misting in the cold air. "Do you ever think about the future?" I asked. He shrugged lightly. "Sometimes. But lately, I just think about today. And today, I'm right where I want to be." Something in me settled when he said that. Not excitement, not yearning, just a calm certainty that maybe, for once, I didn't have to chase happiness. It was already here. The next morning, I visited Ethan's grave again for the last time before the year turned. I brought 2 sunflowers and a small paper boat I'd folded myself. I set it by the headstone, letting the wind carry it toward the river below. "Thank you," I whispered, "for loving me enough to let me find my way back." I stood there a long time, watching the horizon glow with morning light. The city behind me was waking up. Life was moving forward. And so was I. When I finally turned to leave, I felt a strange lightness, as if the world had quietly exhaled and set me free. I don't know what the next chapter of my life will look like. Maybe I'll move to a new city one day. Maybe I'll stay here, surrounded by flower and sunlight and the hum of a small bakery downstairs. But I know this much: I'm not the same woman who once begged for love from people who couldn't give it. I'm not the girl who mistook silence for strength. I am the woman who survived the storm, rebuilt from the wreckage, and learned that revenge is not about destroying others, it's about reclaiming yourself. And if my story finds its way to someone who's standing where I once stood lost, unseen, unheard, I hope they know this. You are not the pain they gave you. You are not the silence that followed. You are the proof that even after the world forgets you, you can remember yourself. Because healing isn't loud. It's quiet. It's a breath, a sunrise, a heartbeat. And one day, without even realizing it, you'll wake up and discover you're not surviving anymore. You're living.